Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorfi, and today I'm very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Mr. John Keefe. Mr. Keefe most recently retired from his position as Director of Cross-Agency Strategy Integration at NASA. Earlier, he assumed duties as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Cyber Policy in June 2022. Furthermore, Mr. Keefe previously served as a senior advisor to the director of the National Security Agency. He has also held senior strategist positions at NSA's counterterrorism, computer network exploitation, signals intelligence, and cybersecurity missions. Prior to joining NSA, Mr. Keefe served as a senior executive in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, as a professional staff member on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and as a special assistant to the U.S. Ambassador to China in Beijing. Before his career in government, Mr. Keefe worked as a civilian operations analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses. As you can see, Mr. Keefe has a wide breadth of experiences and is a visionary leader both in and outside of aerospace in many capacities. I'm very excited to learn about Mr. Keefe's journey and what drew him back to NASA and back to space from his wide career of different roles. So, welcome, Mr. Keefe. Thank you so much for taking the time to inspire the next generation of aerospace leaders.
Thank you, Gitika. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello to everybody who might be listening.
Thank you. Yeah, to kick off our conversation, I have so many questions about your path and just your journey because it seems, such unique experiences. I'm curious how they all connect. But to kick off our conversation, I wanted to start at your most previous role, which was at NASA. I'm curious, what was your main mission and vision for your role as the Director of Cross-Agency Strategy Integration at NASA?
Yes. So first, congratulations to you for being able to speak all of those words clearly. It is a mouthful. Yeah, so I was brought to NASA to chair what is known as the Cross-Directorate Federated Board, which is a coordination point among the deputies of NASA's mission directorates. And it serves as an internal advisory board to the administrative suite. So I actually reported to Pam Melroy, who was then the deputy administrator, retired astronaut as well, and retired Air Force officer. The initial charge from Pam was to produce a low Earth orbit microgravity strategy. So what they were doing was borrowing on my background as a strategist from the National Security Agency. Um, but there was an imperative because the International Space Station, as you know, is set to be retired in 2030. And so the question from our industry and international partners was, um, what is NASA going to do next after the International Space Station is retired? So this strategy that we were charged with developing, which we did through this entity called the Federated Board, was to figure out what are NASA's goals and objectives in low Earth orbit, and that would provide the initial vector for both commercial companies and our international partners, NASA's international partners, to figure out how can they contribute to these things. My broader ambition, since you asked about my vision for this role, my broader ambition was to develop an agency level strategy that for NASA that would help reconcile what turns out to be many competing visions of what NASA should be doing with the available funding, which is generally below what's needed to accomplish any single vision, and then an organizational structure that spans 6 mission directorates and 10 centers, and at the time about 17,000 personnel. So that NASA's in the current environment is shrinking right now, and so I think they're down to 12 or 13,000 personnel. So that's a pretty significant change. Anyway, that NASA wanted to bring me as an outsider into the organization because I didn't bear any of the baggage, so to speak, of the existing tribes within NASA. That's human spaceflight and the science folks. The space operations folks, the ones that operate the International Space Station, the ones that develop technology for both space and separately for aeronautics. And so, because I didn't have any of the perceived biases of any of those tribes, I was viewed as sort of a neutral arbiter. And that's one of the things that made me qualified. That and the fact that I had done strategy for a major agency that was similar in size and in budget to NASA made it sort of an easy fit. And I had the White House experience of running interagency meetings. That was the senior director for cyber policy. Meant I had to run interagency meetings that would bring together multiple departments and agencies together around the table to solve it. At that time, that was really about cyber operations.
Wow. And so coming in kind of as this neutral perspective, I'm sure you also had to learn a lot on the job, not being in the industry directly
Yeah.
working with these different teams necessarily. So how was that transition for you? And did you ever feel like you had to maybe rely on other people's perspectives and opinions to make your own strategic decisions? I'm curious how you navigated that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so as it turns out, I have this inner space and aviation nerd that resides in me, and so just in the course of my national security career, I had always kept an eye on what was going on with NASA. Sparked by the Apollo program and landings on the moon and things like that, all the way back to when I was a kid. I had a pretty good idea of what NASA was up to. I had a close friend of mine who helped arrange my initial contact with NASA. He knew my background and knew what NASA was looking for. And so I would well before I ever landed at NASA, I would pester him with dozens of questions every time we got together. And uh, and so that really sort of set me up for having a pretty good feel for what was going on. And then to the credit of the folks that work at NASA, they love talking about it. They love their jobs and they love working on what they do. And so they were more than happy to try to educate me into, here are the things that are going on. There's a lot of details of things related to specific programs for getting to the moon, the Artemis program, for example, what rocket companies and what manufacturing companies are going to be involved in building the spacecraft for that. That I had to learn all that on the job. But again, there were folks there that were really wonderful to me and teaching me about the details that I needed to know.
That's great. And one other question that I had, which I'm not sure how much detail you could share, but what were some of the factors that you were considering when making these decisions of who would be the key players or what are the projects we need to focus most on? Was it based off of like public interest because NASA is a government agency? Was it more on, just like where the funding would create the most impact or the most output results for? I guess like how did you determine what those criteria were for determining that strategic vision?
Yeah, again a good question. So NASA actually receives a large volume of inputs on what it should be working on.
Right.
That will come from the Office of Management. It comes from the White House, starting with the president. The Office of Management and Budget will tell you how much money you got to spend. If there's a National Space Council, they'll give you the policy guidance. Congress is a strongly vested stakeholder in NASA. You have a lot of jobs in congressional districts. That's often the sort of the primary focus. But then there are specific senators and members of the House that have a particular interest in NASA being successful, and so they have a vision of what NASA needs to get done. And then you have this expansive American public as well as an international public that all want to provide input. And
Right.
NASA, to its credit, is actually very open to all of these inputs. You also have industry partners who, really, are dying to build the hardware and the technology that will take astronauts to the moon, to Mars, or to deliver a telescope into deep space. You have a whole scientific community that has very strong views on where NASA should be investing in its science missions. And so, yeah, there's no shortage of inputs, and then that all comes to the administrator and the deputy administrator, and they will synthesize it down into like, here are the priorities, and that will set the tone for the rest of the organization.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot of voices that you would need to balance out and find what's the best way for the organization. So that's interesting to hear. And kind of given I know you were in the role for about a year but you have a lot of government experience and you've been in this arena, you've been following up this industry for a long time. So if you had to make your own predictions about how you see the aerospace industry evolving in the next 10 years, how do you see the industry changing, the economy changing? I know it's changed so much just in the past 5 years. So, how do you envision the industry changing in the next 10?
Yeah, yes. I think this is a great question because I rarely make predictions that come true. So everybody take my answer with a grain of salt. But the best I can do is outline some of the areas where I think you'll see either growth in the space economy or new factors that will sh shape what that industry and endeavor, space endeavors ultimately look like. First, I think the Golden Dome initiative is something that everybody should be paying attention to. It's $175 billion over 3 years. As we would say in the Department of Defense, that's serious money, and that's to build missile defenses for the United States. That's everything from ballistic missiles to cruise missiles to hypersonic glide vehicles. Two principal adversaries, China and Russia, that can field those kind of technologies. But that amount of money will have an impact, and it will spawn uh, investments in technologies that we'll see whether they pay off over the long run. But that there are lots of companies that are highly incentivized to get into this arena, to include big defense prime contractors as well as small scrappy startups. Um, I think you'll see the continued commercialization of space. There are folks that know this field much better than I do, but so I've picked up quite a bit from them. You see mature industry, satellite communications, satellite position, navigation, and timing systems. So that's the GPS and its follow-ons, and Earth observation satellite companies. So companies that are fielding electro-optical and synthetic aperture radar and infrared sensors, often in low Earth orbit. All those industries are pretty mature with lots of competition, and they're enabled by commercial reusable rockets from companies such as SpaceX and Stoke Space and Rocket Lab. United Launch Alliance is in there in the mix. And so you'll see, I think, this continued commercialization of space. That there's some intriguing work going on manufacturing in space, in low Earth orbit. That if folks figure out, in space manufacturing, if you can figure out how to build bigger structures in space, it's a bit of a game changer. If you can figure out how to do in space refueling, it changes the game and the size, how you plan the logistics for deeper space missions, whether it's to the moon or to Mars with human crew. So I think this commercialization of space ties in with figuring out the low Earth orbit economy. Somewhere out there is the idea for how do I make profit by doing something in space that lets me realize a profit on Earth. And so that's manufacturing pharmaceuticals, semiconductor chips. The one that sometimes intrigues me is asteroid mining. If people can figure out what's the right balance of economics, what are my costs to get there, to do the mining, to bring it back, and is it something that's sufficiently rare on Earth that me bringing back a ton of ore lets me make a profit by selling it here on Earth. And then I think that the president has established landing astronauts and planting the stars and stripes on Mars is an imperative. They're both significant technical and physiological challenges. By that, I mean just how do you get a crew out to Mars and stay on Mars for some period of time and get them back to Earth. That's generally about a 2 year journey. And the physiological challenges for the crew may be the limiting factor rather than the building of the hardware. And whatever it is, it's going to be expensive. And then the last item is the press to land astronauts on the moon. You saw this in the confirmation hearings for confirmation hearing for Jared Isaacman, who was then the nominee to be NASA's administrator. And you saw Senator Cruz in that hearing pressing on the imperative of beating China to the moon. And so those are the things, all of those things will play out over the next 2 to 5 years. And then the longer term effects of things like funding for Golden Dome will play out. And the commercialization of space, those will play out over the next 2 to 10 years.
Just touched on a lot of really great points there. I think there's so many avenues for space. And one thing you did bring up that I was curious if you could touch on a little bit more is how about satellites specifically. Like I know there are many satellite companies out there and they've been there for so long. And as you mentioned, it's a very competitive field because there are a lot of satellite companies. How do you, and there are still new startups in the satellite space. So how do you see satellite industry changing maybe per se, or how do you see this field? Do you think it's kind of reached like saturation or like where is the innovation aspect going to come for the satellite space considering how there are just so many companies I feel like working on the same problems.
Yeah, I think this is a good point. And yes, even I struggle to figure out where's the big payoff because in some regards it feels saturated. What for your listeners, one of the things I do is go and check out the venture capital companies that are investing in space companies and look at what are they trying to emphasize. And so you'll see
Mhm.
companies that are investing in, can I build standard satellite buses at lower cost and higher speed? Can I build a satellite in 9 months rather than taking a couple of years? And so they're experimenting with where's the economy of scale here that can be
Great.
what's the new idea that that would introduce a new wrinkle into the satellite industry that hasn't been done before.
Right.
It's in space. I call them in space tugboats. Can I attach a booster to a satellite and move it up into a higher orbit after it's been performing a mission at a certain orbit? Or if I take a Falcon 9 ride to low Earth orbit and then I'm attached and I have a tugboat and it takes me up into an even higher orbit. So there are folks that I think really know the space industry and where the costs are, and so they're trying to figure out, is there technology that lets me do something that hasn't been done here before at a cost that is reasonable for a variety of customers to come in and pay for?
Definitely. And the amount of data that we're getting from all of these companies is incredible. And I think trying to analyze all of that data that's coming out is also going to be critical and having systems to do that. And I know with AI, hopefully it'll become a lot easier to find some of those gaps and uncover what's happening with all that data that's being collected. And so, kind of going a little bit away from the aerospace sector as an economy, I am really curious about your story. You kind of touched on this a little bit, saying that you've always been kind of a space nerd, interested in space. And I think on LinkedIn, I saw like a comment of one of your, I think it was when you were at Stanford, one of your roommates or classmates was saying you had a poster in your room that, said you wanted to work in space one day. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. So I wanted to kind of go back in time a little bit and ask you, like, what was your aha moment that ignited your passion for space? And then I know you went to college to study aerospace engineering at Stanford. So what was that journey like? And then how did you choose not directly to go work at a space company, but approach more in a policy direction with your career?
Yeah. Actually, the origin story on this is, and never underestimate your roommate's ability to remember something embarrassing about your time in college. But no, I appreciated his comment that he posted on LinkedIn. Yeah. So the origin story on this is that my dad actually taught me how to build scale models when I was quite young. By quite young, I mean like kindergarten. And it started out really simple, but it was a father-son bonding experience. My brother and I both learned this, and so my aha moment for aerospace engineering was actually when I was building a model of the SR-71, which I think I was a junior. I was in junior high school, seventh, eighth, ninth grade. So if folks don't know the SR-70, everybody who's an aerospace engineer knows exactly what plane I'm talking about. If you don't know, it's a spy plane that was built in the 60s and operated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and beyond. It is super cool, really impressive engines. It's very futuristic looking with these conical spikes that jut out of the air intakes, capable of flying above Mach 3 at 3 times the speed of sound at altitudes above 80,000 feet. So when I realized that the SR-71 was built by aerospace engineers and they were at a place called the Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin, I was like, oh, I think I need to go work there. So I was sold on aerospace engineering as a career. And I even put in my senior yearbook, aerospace engineering was my aspiration. And so 5 years later, I had completed degrees in mechanical engineering and aeronautics and astronautics at Stanford. And as you point out, at which point I promptly went in a completely different career direction. And so that's the example of the best laid plans of mice and men. And so I was, as I was coming out of grad school, that was the Reagan defense buildup was still going on. And so that I had an interest in contributing to the nation's security. I thought, oh, the aerospace contracts would be one direction, but then along the way, as I was looking for jobs, I learned about this whole category of entities called think tanks in Washington, D.C. And as you mentioned, the Center for Naval Analyses was something that grabbed my attention. The backstory there is that my dad was actually a Navy doctor from 1970 to 72, and so I had at a young age had been exposed to Navy ships and aircraft, and
Yeah.
And so that stuck with me. It landed at a moment in time where I was rather impressionable. That was the Vietnam War era, so that was not a happy time for any of the armed services. But for me, as a 6 and 7 year old, I was like, wow, this all looks very impressive to me. So that stuck with me, and I thought it'd be interesting to go and work in Washington. And then that particular think tank has its origins in World War II. Mathematicians, scientists, and engineers doing helping the Navy assess its own operations. Back then, it was against German U-boats in the Atlantic, and so the idea that civilians could help turn the tide of that war through sort of studying and analyzing what those anti-submarine warfare operations were looking like and what outcomes, what sort of changes in tactics could produce better outcomes. That was I found that to be really intriguing. It also helped as I was coming out of grad school that the movie Top Gun had come out, and then the later as I had after I joined the Center for Naval Analyses, the movie Hunt for Red October had come out, but I had read the book previously, and so the idea of hunting for Soviet submarines seemed like it'd be super interesting, which is actually I wound up going to work for the Navy, helping them on those kinds of tactics.
It's great. And once you kind of got to that role, I'm curious, did you ever, I know when we were talking initially, I think I was really intrigued by what you said of kind of letting like your career journey going in different directions and not having this like one pathway, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to get a degree in this, and then I'm going to get a job at NASA or do this, this, and this. Kind of everyone's journey is a little bit different and it takes you different directions. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about was that like how did you kind of transfer your skills and also learn on the job? How much did your degree kind of serve you in those initial roles? And then how did you actually grow into where you were? Because you've built your career in such an incredible way in so many different high level government positions. And I'm sure it doesn't just all like click from the beginning. So I'm really curious of that journey of growing your skills and then letting that journey take you to every role in different ways. So I'm curious about that journey of how did you grow into who you are today as like an adult in these different positions?
Yeah, also a great question. The so first I would say I did every job that I ever had as an engineer would do it, and by that I mean just go back to your basic problem sets. What's the question? What are the underlying assumptions? What are the governing equations? What are the results of the calculations, and what do the results mean? Like that is a description of a problem set that I would do
Yeah.
in engineering classes, and it is also a in a abstracted form exactly what I
Wow.
did at the White House, doing policy issues in cybersecurity. And so that's for those engineers who are listening, but it applies to mathematicians and scientists as well. That sort of foundational education, if you abstract it in the right way, you can see what you learned in college and grad school transferring directly into the professional world pretty easily. A few other skills that I learned along the way, and in some respects, I was fortunate at Stanford's engineering program really compelled you to be more broadly formed as a student than just being an engineer, as much as I might have fought them on that. But so the first skill, writing with brevity and clarity. But brevity means don't write 6 pages when you can do it in one page. Clarity is, make sure your ideas are articulated clearly in a way that the reading audience is going to understand. And that is a prerequisite for every job I've ever had, actually. And the Center for Naval Analyses, which really does, you did operations analysis, but you had to finish your results in the form of a research memorandum that was shared with the Navy and or Marine Corps. Um, and so, again, I was fortunate. Stanford required its engineering graduates to be reasonably good at writing before they graduated. And even though I might have railed against that back back at the time, I remember one uh, class that I took in Western culture where the professor asked for a one-page paper at the end of every week, and it was agony for me because I like 1 page. What do you mean? I need to express my ideas in 6 pages. That single class, because I mean, this is now decades later, that class still stands out in my mind as a really important skill to accrue. And it's one of these things that you get better at it over time, but it has been a factor in every position I've ever had, to include working for the director of NSA as a senior strategist, being able to communicate clearly, as he would say, John, nobody reads anything in Washington if it's over 2 pages. 2 pages gets read, 3 pages gets discarded. And so uh, everybody that I worked with at the White House was a skilled writer. Two other skills I'll give you. One is the ability to speak in public, and in public doesn't necessarily have to be like big speech in front of a large audience, but speaking to a workforce or to your team or to a large organization in an auditorium. That was not again. I took a class in that before I left Stanford, and that is one of the classes I was terrible at the outset because I was painfully shy, and that class at least got you to first experience what it is to be in front of people and speaking, and then you figured out like, okay, it's not the end of the world, and then you start to figure out like, okay, what works, and you can learn to read the audience as you're giving a talk, and so that these skills start to accrue. And then the third skill I think that I learned along the way was understanding how organizations work. And so I've worked for large organizations throughout my career, the US Navy, the Department of Defense, US Embassy Beijing, the State Department, Congress, intelligence agencies like the National Security Agency, and then NASA. So that knowing how responsibility, funding, and authority runs through an organization is really important to know who are the decision makers and how does information flow through an organization to accomplish missions. So that is a skill nobody really teaches you that, and yet that was one of those foundational things. I before I go start a new job, I'll pull up the org chart and just that's my initial glance at okay, who on paper should be influencing the decisions that this organization makes, and then over time you learn to start asking about like who are the hidden influence, not the hidden, but who are the influencers in an organization either by virtue of their skill or their network or their past accomplishments that you learn wield a fair amount of influence, and hey, you should probably go talk to those folks. I'll also, since you alluded to it, I was going to share um, my sailboat theory of career progression, if you're okay with this. I know we
Please
talked
do.
about
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
it. So there's actually two models of career progression. This is what I've learned over my, whatever it is, 35 or 40 years of experience. The two career models, one is climb the ladder. That one everybody pretty much knows. The one that nobody tells you about is what I call the sailboat journey theory of career progression. And so for those who don't know, a sailboat moves upwind from point A to point B by tacking back and forth across the wind. And so wind shifts represent opportunities to shorten or optimize your path from point A to point B. The same concept applies in career progression. You start at point B, roughly where you're trying to go. You start at point A, roughly where you're trying to go at point B. When the wind shifts, you change your course, so you tack the sailboat, and you wind up on a new course, and that new course might be more interesting. So for me, think of the tacking across the wind as those are changing positions or changing jobs or even changing career fields. The wind shifts are the signals that you're getting from the environment that says maybe it's time to change direction. So the big wind shifts for me in the course of my career was the end of the Cold War. 9/11 was a gigantic wind shift for me. The emergence of the internet and cyberspace was another, and then the changes that the nation's undergoing right now, that was another sign for me it was time for me to change course. And that's as of about 10 weeks ago. Wind shifts also operate on a personal level. At what point do you feel like you've done all that you can do in a given position? And at what point is ambition starting to call you and you want to take on something bigger? So the path that I took from NSA to NASA was a bit of an unexpected one, actually. I had done all the senior positions at NSA that I wanted to do. I had, realized my ambition. I had wanted to work at the White House at some point in my career, and so I had just completed that a year ago. To be honest, the working at the White House would take you from a complex three-dimensional person. It will flatten you out into a one-dimensional workaholic. And so it's not uncommon for people to come out of the White House feeling pretty burned out. And so I thought I was going to retire from federal service back then, and then the winds shifted again, which is this friend of mine that I had mentioned. knew my background as a strategist at NSA, and he was former NASA and was connected to the NASA leadership, knew what they were looking for, and he brokered an introduction. And the rest, as they say, was a bit of history. And yes, I got to indulge my inner space and aviation nerd, and hopefully do some good things for NASA along the way.
Wow, that's an incredible full circle moment. And I want to start off with what you were initially saying about your college education, because
Yeah.
actually, I think that's one of the first times, like on a recorded interview I've got, where someone said their college education had made such a profound difference in their career, or at least their mindset of learning certain skills or approaching different problems. Usually, people say, "Oh, college didn't help me get to point A or to like understand how to do my job necessarily." But it's amazing to hear kind of a different take on it of how it kind of gave you that initial problem solving, reasoning abilities. It introduced you to skills you might have not wanted to learn. I know I experience that right now where I'm, supposed to take a lot of like art, writing classes, even though it has nothing to do with my major for like credit requirements. And, sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't really know if I like art history, but it's introducing me to so many things I wouldn't have otherwise indulged in. So definitely kind of taking that new perspective of embracing new skills that college teaches you, but also that basic problem solving skill. Yeah, I can definitely relate to the PSAT. So it's good to know that those translate into real life. But also what you
Yeah.
were mentioning about the tides. Or were you going to say something?
Yeah. Just another memorable Stanford class was because they forced their engineers to take a well-rounded education. I took a course in East Asian art, which to this day sticks with me. Uh, I didn't know what Angkor Wat was. My ambition is to still get there. I haven't quite made it there yet, but it showed me a art and sculpture and architecture that I didn't even know existed on planet Earth until I'd seen pictures of it. And I was like, I need to go see those things.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, I've had very similar experiences where I'm like, I never thought I would enjoy this class as much as I ended up doing, and
Yes.
what I took away from that. So definitely agree with it, and especially what you were saying about the career as well. As someone who kind of has that mind, like as a younger student, I think, oh, you need to achieve this, this, this. It's kind of like a ladder, right? But approaching life it also as an opportunity or a topic intrigues you, kind of following your heart and realizing, taking things in as life brings them to you like you said, situations change, things outside of your control change. And if there's a certain thing drawing you, going towards that is also important to recognize. And being comfortable to do that is also
Okay.
a correct way of approaching your career. And so that's really nice to hear. And that kind of leads me to my next question, I think perfectly of obstacles. I think many times we all face obstacles in different ways. Did you in your career face any obstacles? And if so, more importantly, how did you overcome
Yeah, that again, you ask great questions. And I will also say, just before I move off the sailboat theory of career progression, tacking the boat to this is the point that you were implicitly getting at. Tacking the boat, there's a level of anxiety that comes with making a career shift that just everyone should just know, like, yes, I felt it. I literally felt it every step of the way when I decided to resign out of NSA to go over to NASA. Like, I'm like, okay, I know this NSA National Security Agency organization really well. I'm comfortable here. I know I can do the
them?
job. Do I want to give that up and to go work at NASA? And it was like, and what really drew it was that wind shift. It was like NASA's talking about going to the moon. That's the team that I want to be on. And I think I can bring some skills that they may not have in abundance. But yes, for folks that are wherever they are in their career, if they're just starting out, like yes, every time you tack the boat is a level of anxiety, and you just learn to if you know that that's what's going on, it makes it a little less scary to tack the boat. In terms of obstacles on my journey, yeah, this here's the big theme out of all the different positions that I've had, which is getting buy-in for ideas turns out to be like the biggest obstacle that I think I had to contend with. And so that applies to Capitol Hill and the White House especially, where there's a lot of competition for ideas, but also to agencies like NSA and NASA, the U.S. Navy, Department of Defense, even U.S. Embassy Beijing. That there's you're always working as part of a team. Everybody's got a bunch of ideas. I was a strategist. Strategist is not something that people just accept from someone who wears the title strategist. And so getting buy-in for ideas is really essential. That was probably the biggest obstacle I ran into along the way. And in formulating it turns out that, all right, to get buy-in, formulating strategy, there's a whole process that ought to underpin it. In other words, it's not just me. I sit in my office and I think, all right, NASA or NSA, like here's what the strategy looks like. No, there's a whole bunch of people that own different parts of the mission who really need to weigh in, and it really starts with that whole team looking at all of its possible futures, and they got to decide what they need to do. They, in general, they'll know where they currently are. They kind of know where they want to be in a couple of years, and then they need to figure out what are my steps for getting there. And that is that process of talking about what does the future look like, what are the steps for getting there. Everybody gets to participate. That's when everybody's ideas get heard, and then the skilled strategist starts absorbing all of that, and you start synthesizing it down, saying, okay, these are the good ideas. Strategist may have his or her own good ideas as well, and so that there's your chance. You're really trying to listen to everybody's ideas, put your ideas in place, see which ones resonate. Some of them will, some of them won't. And then you have to be perceived as the honest broker of trying to figure out what is the way that we capture all the important things that we need to get done without overwhelming the entire organization with a homework list of 123 assignments. Usually it's like 4, 5, or 6 things to get done. In Washington, sometimes people say you get 3 priorities, 3 big things that you're gonna try to get done. If you can get it down to those things, chances are high you'll actually get them done, and that they can have quite a bit of impact. And then that strategy of getting the buy-in and ideas, you're shaping outcomes that may be related to mission, and may be related to policies that the president's going to sign, or maybe legislation that Congress is going to vote on. So the getting there is never easy, but you get there through this sort of shared process where you create common goals, shared solutions, and then joint implementation. I always tell people don't forget the implementation, because 90% of strategy is actually the implementation, not the writing of strategy.
I love that. Yeah, that's really nice to know that that was one of, I mean, I can, now that you're vocalizing, I can see how it's difficult because there are hundreds of people trying
Yes.
to get their agendas out and push their opinions. And it can be a lot when nobody wants to really put everything into one, actor. There's too many things to cover at once. So yeah, approaching that in a smart way, in a collective way is really important. So definitely we'll try to figure that out. And I'm sure you learn on the job and you kind of figure out what's the right way of doing it, and you learn strategically who are the right people or the right ways to do it. So that's really interesting to hear that. And so
And
now that yeah,
And a little bit of advice for folks. This is a skill I learned. I had to go. I was in my 40s, and I learned it on the hill. Because engineer doing operations analysis or being an engineer like this sort of you drain all the sort of emotional empathy out of the job. It's equations, it's assumptions. You
right.
turn the crank, you run the computer. Um, I learned this on the hill. When you hear ideas that one of the things, a skill that everybody should have is when you hear ideas that resonate with you, write them down. And part of it is that you're getting an emotional response, but also as you hear an idea that resonates with you, check the audience around you to see whether it's resonating with more people. And likewise, when you put an idea on the table that you may think is greatest, read the room to see whether it resonates with anybody. And that learning to be tuned into what works with people is a skill that, again, this is something I just had to learn along the way. It's not like you could take a class in it. But that ability to be tuned into what people were thought, how they offered their ideas, whether they resonated, and then whether they resonated with a large group of people, those are important clues in getting a large organization to go accomplish big things.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear that from someone who's been in those really important rooms, because now you know, like, oh, these are things or these are cues I should be looking for
Yeah.
when I'm in a special room where I'm trying to pitch an idea, trying to hear and see people's facial expressions. Am I talking too long, or are they agreeing with what I'm saying? Like, is this the right, approach? So definitely it's an interesting advice that I'll definitely take to heart. And now that we were able to learn a little bit about both your journey and your perspectives about the aerospace sector, my last and final question for you is, you've given plenty of advice throughout this interview, but if you could go back in time to your younger self, maybe when you were in college or you just graduated, and you could tell yourself something, what would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, first I would tell my this is tongue in cheek. I tell myself, don't drink so much Coca-Cola. The sugary drinks, I drank them for quite a while. I gave them up in my 40s, but I would have told myself really just give them up. The other thing I did do, which I would reinforce, is I did exercise. Like I've exercised since my 20s, so that again, folks, this will serve you well throughout your life, and it may not feel great, when you're tired and you got a job that's all consuming and getting enough exercise can be a challenge, but go do that. But really to your a serious answer to your question, I'd tell, so I was, you know, I was pretty smart in my high school class. I was pretty smart at Stanford. Uh, that lends itself to both ambition and anxiety. Like, am I going to be good enough? The next step, is am I going to be perceived as succeeding? And I would just tell myself, look, if you work hard, you do your homework, be a good teammate, treat others well, and project confidence without projecting ego. Like that is a summation of the things that I think work. If you do those things, I would tell my younger self, if you do those things, things are gonna turn out fine. Um, I had a Navy admiral who was a mentor of mine that I'd worked for a whole bunch of years. He used to summarize it like this, and this was this was guidance on leadership. He said, "Know your stuff, take care of your people, lead, and take responsibility." Like those three pieces of things, I think are great advice. And then I'd also tell myself, notwithstanding how I felt about some of the classes I took, learn to write with brevity and clarity and get comfortable speaking in front of large groups sooner than I actually did. It took me a while to learn that skill.
Wow, thank you for sharing. I'm sure all of the young students who are listening, or even young professionals who are listening, will really take that to heart. I recently was not super big into the gym, but I started getting into it, and so knowing that it's helpful, I'll keep doing it. And
Yeah.
also just in life in general, I think it's so important. Like you said, one, do your homework when you're in a room, when you're expected to do a job. Like doing that prep work, doing that background work is so important, so you can contribute in a productive way and not in a very unproductive way. So definitely kind of doing that, leading with responsibility. And like you said, always having that humility is also crucial. So having confidence but not ego is it's an important balance that I think everyone's trying to figure out as they navigate their careers. So we'll definitely take that advice to heart. So thank you so much, Mr. Keefe, for sharing your advice and your story with us today. I had such a great time. I didn't even know how the time flew by. So
It
thank you
did fly
so
by.
much. So thank you so much for all of your time today.
Well, thank you, Gitika. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.
Thank you.